Hi, I'm John Nelson, and I've been working with you since 2010 on studying your work environment and your processes of caring. Now, when we did our last measure in 2012, we identified that there were some units and departments that were very high scoring. So we want to add a new process of analysis called constructal theory, which has to do with pause and flow. And the reason that this is important is because our current methods are inadequate to really understand how we can do what's working well, more of it, and how we can stop doing what is impeding what's working well. Now, this is the current process that we are using. It's called Gaussian mathematics, and you're all familiar with a line graph. And I've drawn this example here for patient satisfaction. And here we have a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being not very satisfied and 5 being very satisfied. Now, you might be using a 1 to 7 scale, a 1 to 4 scale, but this is just an example to show the type of mathematics or analytics that we're currently using. Now, I put the score from least satisfied to most satisfied here, and here is the months of the year: January, middle January, February, middle February, March, middle March, etc. And what I've noted is something that we would normally look at in a meeting with our unit practice council or with our manager or with some quality improvement. And we'll talk about how the patient satisfaction has improved in its score over time. And what we will note is the trajectory. As you see, we have a continual improvement. So it's the trend that we pay attention to. And we also want to be in the 95th percentile, which is right here. So we want to be here. Now, what often happens, though, is we celebrate the improvement, and once we get up into the 95th percentile, and let's say later in the year we have a decline, and what often happens is we focus on the decline rather than the trend, and that we're still in the 95th percentile. What often happens, instead of celebrating the success and the high score, is we have a discussion, emergency meeting, about what's broken, what's not working well, why did this go down. We focus on the number rather than on what's working, and we don't identify that this is how Gaussian mathematics works, is it works on the mean or the average. So Gaussian mathematics works on low numbers, high numbers, low numbers, high numbers, and it uses the average. So we need to figure out a way that how we can keep on this trajectory even past the top of the scale. How do we keep doing more of what works well and do it faster and more of it? And that's why we'll keep using this mathematics, but we'll move to something called constructal theory, and we're going to look at what makes you pause in your work, what makes this slow down. So here would be pause, here would be pause, here would be pause, and what makes flow. Here's flow, here's flow. All this we want to keep doing more of. Now there are three kinds of pause and 3 types of flow. There's obvious pause. Now here I have a picture of something that's very obvious. It's a coworker yelling at another coworker. That's very obvious. It's impeding my work. I focus on it all day long, so that impedes the flow of my work. Another kind would be a varied pause. Now, let's say, for example, that you're looking for some stock, and you're a very seasoned nurse. You see that the stock isn't there, but you have a stash of extra supplies in your patient room, so you have created shortcuts or ways to work around the system. Now, a new nurse may not have those shortcuts or have the experience to know how to work around the system. So this would be a significant pause for the new nurse, whereas for a seasoned nurse, it's maybe not such a significant pause. The final type of pause is we call a subtle pause, and this is something that you wouldn't necessarily notice. Let's say, for example, you're going to the dentist, and you're in the lounge and you're listening to some very nice classical music. You get up to go to see your dentist in the clinical area, and it changes to a subtle, soft jazz or soft type of pop music. Still nice, but it does create a pause that you may or may not be aware of. Now, our bodies, when it pauses, it's telling us that something in the flow isn't working quite right. Now, if we have enough pauses in a day, we may leave the dentist office and say, you know, that there wasn't really anything in particular that I didn't like, but there was just something about that experience that didn't flow. And that's because there's subtle pauses that you may not have consciously noticed, but that did affect your experience. Now, flow is not as easy to identify because pause is more abrupt, so you can feel it or notice it more immediately. Whereas flow, it tends to be more gradual. Now, there's also three kinds of flow, and the first one would be obvious flow. Here I have a picture of enjoyable team members. They're being kind of goofy, but having enjoyable team members definitely does add to the flow. So that's more obvious. Now there's also varied flow. What may make your job really go well one day or may not be so much for your coworker. Say, for example, you work in the ICU and you love neuro patients, and there's a really sick neuro patient that's come flying in on a helicopter. Now, you may really enjoy being challenged clinically and doing what you can to help this patient and that family. So, utilizing all of your skills, clinically, socially, emotionally, all those things coming together are very enjoyable for you, and that makes your day flow. Now, let's say it's a nurse who's an ICU nurse and specializes in cardiac. Now, that neuro patient may be really stressful and create pause rather than flow. So, flow can vary from employee to employee. Now, the last kind of flow we call subtle flow. And this, like subtle pause, may not be readily noticed, but it might be just a quiet time with the patient. It may be just the satisfaction of knowing your patient ate well that day because their protein is low, as evidenced by their labs. So it's something you may not notice, but it did help your day. Now, in this study, we are going to be working with you to understand what helps your day flow better and what inhibits it by creating pause. So now I'm just going to take a few minutes to review with you how we'll use the survey software to understand your flow and your pause in your workday. On the day the study launches, you will receive this link from someone within your organization, or you will be directed how to access this link from within your organization's intranet system. Now, once you enter the survey portal, you will need to enter some information to access your private survey that nobody else will have access to. You'll need to enter your last name, and I'll enter a test name here. Enter your first name as well, along with your employee code and the name of your facility. Now, it should be noted that organizations that use this intranet process do so because they would like our company to conduct more complex analyses of the data. Examples of analyses include within subject and interaction effects, which help us to understand how employees change and evolve over time. If you'd like more details about the methods, contact us at Healthcare Environment using our contact page. I will note that Healthcare Environment uses only HIPAA-compliant methods, and your responses will always remain confidential. We report group data only and not individual data. Now, if you do want a copy of your individual responses sent to you via email, provide that email here. Now, nobody else but you will have a copy of these responses, but we do suggest sending yourself a copy for your records, for individual action planning, or so you can see how you compare to everyone else in your unit or hospital or organization. Now we'll proceed to the survey. And you see on this particular page there's some extensive directions. Now, not every survey will have extensive directions like this one. There's some consent in it as well. So we'll page down to the bottom, and there you see we will select to continue. Now, when we do go to the next page, there is also one sentence of direction for this page. Now, each page may or may not have directions for that respective page. Now, we'll proceed to respond to each of the items. Some will be Likert, some will be demographic, some will be text. Now, there may be a question that you feel uncomfortable responding to and you want to leave it blank. So we're going to do that here so you can see how to manage unanswered or responses that have been left blank. We'll respond to the demographic, and then I'll just provide a couple words for text as a sample for you. And then you note at the bottom I have an option to either go to the previous page to continue or to save and return to this survey, but I'm going to continue. And you'll note that I'm prompted to go back and answer question 7 because it was blank, but I already know that and I want it left blank, so I'm going to continue. Now when you do arrive at the last page, you see that there's again 3 options to either go to the previous page, to save and return later before submitting, or I can submit. And I am satisfied with my responses. I'm going to submit knowing that I cannot return to this survey once I submit.